Hey guys, my name is Tommy. Welcome back to another episode of Min-Maxing for Fun and Profit, where we remind the world that the only rule is there are a whole bunch of rules, so you might as well exploit them. Today we're going to put two ability scores, Strength and Dexterity, under the microscope to see which one of these can get us farther in combat. After my last video, where we figured out the guy wearing no armor can get as much armor class as the guy covered in armor, I decided I wanted to see if that same guy with a high dexterity score can get as much out of his weapons as the big burly muscle guy swinging an axe. Now, of course, this video is not going to be a one-size-fits-all for every character. For example, the two-handed fighter can get double his strength bonus on attacks with two-handed weapons, ergo, dumping his strength score, probably not a good idea, and he's probably going to outshine the dex characters just by virtue of his class. I'm sure there are plenty of other characters that work just the same way, so take this min-maxing video with a grain of salt. So why exactly would we challenge the notion that strength will carry us through combat, the ability to swing our axe really hard is what's going to solve our problems and stuff? The answer is simple. When we roll our stats, when we use our point buys, inevitably, some of our stats are going to be lower than others. Our dump stats, as we refer to them, are the stats that our character is never going to use. For example, our wizard will never use his strength score because he's going to be casting spells, / our barbarian will never use his charisma score because he's going to be hacking at people who cast spells. After last week's min-maxing video, where we learned that 2 paladin levels and 1 scaled fist level means we can add our charisma to our saves and our armor class, I think I'm starting to believe pretty firmly that strength should be our dump stat instead of charisma. Now, of course, if the RPG gods smile on you and you are able to roll great stats across the board, then okay, fine. Have that high strength, have that high dexterity, and do whatever it is you want to do in combat. However, every single solitary other stat brings something to the table that I think we just can't ignore. Prioritizing our dexterity over our strength assumes we're going to have 3 things: our reflex save, our initiative roll, and the amount of armor class we add from our dexterity. Reflex saves aren't rolled as often as will saves are in the groups I run in, but they still exist, and if your GM figures out you have a low dexterity score, who's to say he's not going to set off an entire necklace of fireballs in your face? Also, last week we learned that dexterity can get you just as far, if not farther, in terms of armor class as the guy covered in plate mail carrying a big shield, especially since we've learned that shield bonuses do not stack. Initiative determines your order in combat, and as far as I'm concerned, if I get to go first, if I get the chance to hit the bad guy first, I'll do damage faster than he will, which means he'll die faster than me and my friends will, which is exactly what we're looking for in a combat situation. The Constitution is an easy one, especially if we're playing something with a D6 or D8 hit dice. We need all the extra hit points a high Constitution can bring. Even if we're playing something with a D12 hit dice and we're rolling for hit points every level, if we roll that 1, a super high Constitution score can help us bridge the gap. Also, dumping our Constitution makes our Fortitude save smaller than it should be. So if somebody tries to poison us, or if we have to go into a forced march type scenario, we're much more likely to drop and be useless to the rest of the party. Now, generally, your big UG smash characters like barbarians only get 2, 4, maybe 6 plus intelligence modifier skills per level. To me, that says we should absolutely never dump our intelligence. Yeah, sure, the party might have somebody with high intelligence or lots of skill ranks, but what happens when they roll bad? What happens when they natural 1 and lead us down the wrong corner? What happens when your character is separated from them and has to make some kind of check on his own? More intelligence means our character has more skills per level, and believe it or not, there are parts of this game that really do exist outside of combat. Don't dump it. There are 3 reasons why we never, ever dump our wisdom. Our perception checks, probably the most rolled check in the game. Our sense motive checks, probably the 2nd or 3rd most rolled skill in the game. And our will save, at least in my group, in the games that I've been a part of, that's the save that we have to make the most. If we dump our wisdom, not only are we going to find all these liars taking our gold and stabbing us in back alleys, we're also not going to see the threats falling down on our head to take our gold and stab us in back alleys, or, that wizard who's casting mind control spells to make us kill people in back alleys. And finally, charisma. Charisma is oftentimes the stat that I see, and in the past I myself have been, okay, we're going to dump this stat to make sure our strength gets there. However, like I said before, a high charisma means all of our saves go up. A high charisma can mean our armor class goes up with no restriction on how much dex we can add to our armor class, with no armor check penalty. In my opinion, those 3 levels are 3 levels that can make a character who's really, really good shoot up into the stratosphere. Therefore, I advise to never dump charisma, and if we must make a dump stat, it should be strength. Now, strength does apply to things other than our attack rolls, so dumping strength will mean other things for the character. We apply our strength not just to attack rolls and damage rolls, but climb checks and swim checks, CMD, as well as our carrying capacity. Let's say we decide we're going to build a melee character and we're going to dump his strength to 10. That means a light load for us is up to 33 pounds, which means basically we're probably just carrying the gear that we're using to adventure and little more. This can be a problem in the early game as we're trying to lug things out of the dungeon to go sell them, or even to lug our own gold around. However, in the late game, we can circumnavigate this problem with a portable hole. Just throw it on the ground, push, or if you need to, have the whole squad push the loot into the hole. We fold it back up to where it's the size of a handkerchief, weighing nothing, and take our stuff from the dungeon, from the battlefield, wherever, back to town to sell it. Honestly, in the early game, I also don't see any problem with having downtime going back and forth to get the stuff from a cleared dungeon type area back to town. If more monsters show up or more adventurers show up to try to take this stuff from us, hey, it's more experience points. Drowning is a real threat if we're failing swim checks, if we don't have swim as a class skill, and we're also very susceptible to grappling. Easiest way to fix this? For a nominal fee of 40,000 gold, not a whole lot, even in like the mid-game, we can pick ourselves up a ring of freedom of movement. Freedom of movement lets you move normally, even under the influence of things like paralysis, solid fog, slow, things like that, and all combat maneuver checks made to grapple you automatically fail. In addition, it allows you to move and attack normally while underwater, even with slashing weapons. We could also take the Agile Maneuvers feat if we decide we want to build some kind of dexterous wrestler. However, this ring solves 2/3 of our problem. As far as our terrible climb check goes, I like to solve this problem with the boots/helm of teleportation. Wearing both those items, and you can wear the helm of teleportation over top of a headband of mental perfection, means we have 6 teleport spells per day. Can't figure out how to climb up the side of that wall? Just click your heels and wish yourself back to Kansas, Dorothy. Now, like I said in the beginning of this video, there's a bajillion ways to skin an owlbear, and there's a lot of classes that are going to benefit from having a 2-handed weapon, or classes that are going to be dual-wielding small weapons like daggers, such as the Knife Master Rogue, for example. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to compare one class side by side. We're going to assume one player prioritized his strength and dumped his dexterity, and the other player prioritized his dexterity but dumped his strength. Specifically, we're going to look at the Unchained Barbarian, which is pretty much the same thing as our regular Barbarian, except his rage gives us a bonus on melee attack rolls and melee damage rolls, not our strength score. Meaning this Barbarian is just as competent in combat with his dexterity as he would be with his strength. The Strength Barbarian is going to be using a weapon 2-handed with power attack. That means we're taking 1 point away from our attack roll to add 3, multiplying as we leveled, assuming we're holding a weapon in 2 hands. To compensate for this, because obviously adding 3 points to your damage every time power attack ticks up is better than 2 points, our Dexterity Barbarian is going to dual wield light weapons. Our Strength Barbarian is going to be pretty simple. We're not going to go into a whole lot of depth with him. We just want to make sure he's dishing out damage. So we've given him the best weapon in terms of damage that I can think of for a 2-handed build, the Butchering Axe. That weapon from Adventurer's Armory 2 does 3d6 points of damage with a threat range of 20 times 3. We'll assume he's 20th level and he's invested everything he can into his strength, abusing the power attack feat, meaning at the end of the day he's adding 18 points of damage for using a 2-handed weapon and throwing everything he can into power attack. Our Dexterity Barbarian is going to take a little more, pardon the pun, finessing to get the job done. The penalties for using a not light weapon in our offhand can drag us down even with the 2-weapon fighting feats, so after careful consideration, our Dexterity Barbarian will be wielding dual Sunblades. Of course, this is an expensive magic item, and for a long time, we're probably going to make do on a bastard sword with exotic weapon proficiency in the main hand, short sword in the offhand type thing, but eventually, Once we can get our hands on dual sunblades, we'll be dual-wielding bastard swords, but treating them as short swords with respect to their weight and ease of use. Now, there's nothing in here that verbatim states that this will remove the penalties and treat the sunblade as light for the purpose of two-weapon fighting. However, I think we're good enough to say that we can dual-wield sunblades in combat. Bastard swords deal 1d10 damage and crit 19 to 20 times 2. It did cross my mind to take something like a katana wakizashi build or dual scimitars, things like that, something that could raise our threat range a little bit higher, but I feel like that puts us at a little bit of too much of an advantage over the strength barbarian, so we chose the best weapon we could with only having, before the keen enchantment, 5% more likelihood to score a critical hit. Now, this character is going to take several feats and weapon enchantments to be able to catch up to the strength guy. First and foremost, we're looking at weapon finesse. With a light weapon, such as an elven curved blade, rapier, dagger, or, in our case, short swords, you may use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier on attack rolls. Unlike in 5th edition, where a finesse weapon automatically adds dexterity to attack and damage, in Pathfinder, we combine weapon finesse with the agile weapon enchantment. A character who has weapon finesse can use this enchantment to apply their dexterity modifier to damage rolls in place of their strength modifier. Now, this enchantment states specifically that this modifier to damage is not increased for two-handed weapons, but is still reduced for offhand weapons. Under normal circumstances, an offhand weapon does half damage. The icing on the cake here is the feat Double Slice. This feat allows us to add our strength bonus to damage rolls with our offhand weapon, as opposed to normally adding only half of our strength rolls. Now, there's a lot of contention here between Double Slice and the Agile enchantment as to whether or not this feat and this enchantment interact. Double Slice comes from the core rulebook, whereas the Agile enchantment comes from the Hell's Rebels adventure path. One camp says that since Double Slice specifically reads strength, the Agile enchantment does not interact with it. The other camp says that since we're already spending 2 feats and an enchantment to get our weapon to do dexterity to damage, there's no reason we can't assume that a feat that was put out in the core rulebook and an enchantment that was put out several years later can't interact with each other, and we can't assume that Double Slice for a dexterity-based character says that we are adding our full dex with our offhand weapon. Lastly, our Dexterity Barbarian can't take power attack. If we assume he dumps his strength below 13, he does not qualify. Our Dexterity Barbarian will be taking instead the feat Piranha Strike, which says exactly the same thing, minus the extra bit about damage for two-handed weapons, and with a convenient caveat that says this feat cannot be used in conjunction with the power attack feat. As a last note, before we get down to the stats, we will also be adding the dual balanced weapon modification from Adventurer's Armory 2. This modification states, when wielding weapons with the dual balanced modification, we reduce any two-weapon fighting penalties for these weapons by 1. Now, normally, when we would apply this to a weapon, it would make a simple weapon become a martial weapon, and a martial weapon become an exotic weapon. Under normal circumstances, this means taking a second proficiency to see to it that we can use the weapon. However, if we're sticking with sun swords, our weapon is a bastard sword and a short sword all at once. One item that is worth mentioning but does not quite make the cut when we consider the power of the Sunblade is Effortless Lace from the Giant Hunter's Handbook. When wrapped around the grip of a weapon for 24 hours, the ribbon's magic permanently reduces the penalty incurred by a wielder who is smaller than the weapon's intended wielder by 2. In addition, that weapon becomes treated as a light melee weapon when determining whether it can be used with weapon finesse and anything that has to do with weapon finesse. Now, that does not directly say that it reduces the two-weapon fighting penalties. However, in the description, you'll find a link directly to a Paizo forum where the creator of the Effortless Lace magic item clearly states that he worded Effortless Lace as he did to make dual scimitar builds something that could be actually accomplished without a -4 penalty on attack rolls. However, it's all kind of a moot point as we're sticking with the Sunblade. So let's get down to combat. Starting with our Strength Barbarian at 20 strength, plus an additional 5 points from our Magic Tome, and an additional 6 points from our Magic Belt, we're looking at 36 strength or a 13 modifier. Before any weapon enhancements, before the speed enchantment to give us another attack, things like that, our attack bonus is looking at 32, 27, 21, and 17. Our big scary axe does 3d6 points of damage, assuming a max of 18, plus our 13 strength, plus 1.5 times, or 6, plus 18 from power attack, 4 from rage, equals 59 damage, assuming all 4 of them connect. That's 236 damage dealt out in a round before any shenanigans like Vital Strike, before the Impact Enchantment, anything like that. Our Dexterity Barbarian, assuming he put that 18 in his Dexterity instead of his Strength, 2-weapon fighting on Sunblades comes out to 31, 31, 26, 26, 20, 20, 17. After all his math, he comes out doing 39 damage. Of course, this could never keep up with the Strength Barbarian, but since we're dual wielding, we get 7 attacks. Assuming all of those connect, we're looking at 273 points of damage. All of that damage done without ever picking up a dumbbell. Now, just for fun, let's assume that we rolled 2 and only 2 18s and played a race with a +2 to Dexterity and a +2 to Charisma, like, I don't know, about half the races in Pathfinder. Let's assume we put that other 18 into our Charisma score and did not take 20 Unchained Barbarian levels. Rather, we take 17 Unchained Barbarian levels, 2 Paladin levels, and 1 Scaled Fist Monk level. Since we never get a base attack of 20 or the Unchained Barbarian's capstone, we end up at 245 damage. At this level of multiclassing, the Barbarian who prioritizes strength is catching up with us. However, with 2 Paladin levels and 1 Scaled Fist level, we can add our 10 Charisma modifier to our armor class and to our saves. I think that is more than reasonable of a trade-off, considering the fact that nobody out there wants to die, / nobody out there wants to fail a will save at a super crucial time. Now, of course, this is just an example of one class. As we've demonstrated in past videos, there are classes that can use a high strength to do far more damage than this. And by that same token, things like the Knife Master Rogue getting D8 sneak attacks anytime they use a light weapon, something we would finesse and use our dexterity with, would be able to abuse their dexterity much more. And I'm sure that the differences go farther and farther out from there. However, this video goes to show that we do not need to rely on our strength in combat situations, and in situations where we need to dump a stat at character creation, it is perfectly reasonable, perfectly rational to take a character and dump his strength, expecting him to do just fine in melee. So have you guys ever played a finesse character in melee? And if so, how did it turn out? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. The next min-maxing video drops next Wednesday.